All right, we have a 115 Mercury Saltwater Edition EFI. It's a 2005, and we have low fuel pressure. Pretty much running like crap. It starts up and it sounds just fine, and you'll go for maybe a minute or two at low speed. If you try to accelerate, you can't get full throttle. It seems like it starts up good, starts up just fine, but when you start running, if you go full throttle, you don't even get 5,500 RPM like we normally would. And when you go full throttle and whatever RPM it gets to, it slowly loses speed, and then it just starts running like crap. Almost sounds like it's misfiring. But we checked all 4 injectors, and all 4 injectors are good. Now there's two fuel pumps on these motors. There's the low pressure fuel pump, which basically just feeds the system and keeps the siphon going from the fuel tank. And then there's the high pressure fuel pump, which is behind all this mess right here. So how do we find out we had low pressure? Well, this little Schrader valve right on top of the fuel rail here, you can go buy a fuel pressure gauge straight from Harbor Freight. It's like 30 or 40 bucks. Pretty cheap gauge, but it comes with the correct adapter to go right on this Schrader valve. You hook it up and prime your motor. So at idle, it should read like 30 psi, 35 psi, and at 1500 RPM, and we should read 41 to 44 psi, and we were only getting 28 psi. 28 psi at 1500, and at prime we were only seeing 10 psi, so we know we got low fuel pressure. Now it could either be the low pressure pump or the high pressure pump back there causing the low pressure. So the first thing we did was check the easy pump, and how you do that is you disconnect a line here on the discharge, and you disconnect the inlet to the low pressure pump, and you hook up one of those hand pump pressure gauges. Another thing you can buy from Harbor Freight, and you need to pressurize the discharge side to 7 psi, and this pump should hold that, no leakage. And same thing with the inlet, you pressurize that to 7 psi, and it should hold it, and no leaking. And so and then you need to test vacuum on both discharge and inlet. So you hook it up on this side, you create a vacuum to 4 inches of mercury, and it should hold that. And then the same thing on the inlet. We did that on the low pressure side, and the low pressure pump tested good. So we deemed the low pressure pump good, which leaves 2 things that it could be: either the high pressure pump or the fuel regulator. In talking with some so-called experts, they say the regulator is rarely bad, and it's also a $400 regulator, which is just on top of the fuel rail. But they said more often than not, the high pressure fuel pump goes bad. So today we're just gonna break into that, which requires removing the lower cowling, taking the manifold off, and then you can get to the VST, which is where the high pressure pump is stored inside. So yeah, we're gonna get to it and just show you a good process. All right, to take the lower cowling off, there's a bunch of bolts on the outside, one there, one there, one there. There's some bolts there, and then that one, and I believe you have to take this one off. We'll find out soon enough. But they're all 8 millimeter. So 8 millimeter socket. Get to wrenching. This motor has a trim button on the side, so just don't forget to disconnect your wires here before you pull the lower cowling. Just some bolt connectors, looks like. All right, lower cowling off. We're just gonna take off the left side, just because we don't really need to do anything over here. So remember what I said about disconnecting your trim switch. Probably don't have to do that, but we did it anyway. So as you can see, it's a lot easier to get to all the bolts and nuts and everything that hold this intake manifold on. And yeah, we have to take this off because the VST is right behind it. Thank you, Mercury, for making the most commonly bad fuel pump the hardest one to get to. All right, little update here. We're just in the process of getting all this stuff out of the way, and we're taking our time. We took the fuel rail and fuel cooler off and disconnected some of the water hoses and just letting it dangle so it's out of the way. Here's the fuel rail inlet. Manifold still on. We're working on that, pulling that off next. We took the plastic air intake box off just so we can, I think we're going to be able to take the throttle body bolts out of the manifold, and the throttle body should be able to stay in place when we remove the manifold. So that's where we're at right now. All right, guys, we got the intake manifold off. We did keep the throttle body on the intake manifold. That seems to be the way to go. There's just these two brackets that hold the throttle body onto the engine, and then once you get all the bolts and crap loose, it just pulls right off. Throttle body has these two pins here and here that kind of help guide it on, so you got to pull it straight out when you loosen it. But yeah, here's on the back side, the VST is mounted to it, so we got to pull that off and crack the case and get into it and see what our fuel pump looks like. All right, we got the VST in our hands now. There's the plug for the fuel pump itself right there. What do we got here? I believe
there's a bolt on the back side.
Yep, it was 3 bolts from the front of the manifold to free up the VST. I believe this is your fuel discharge, which flows to the bottom of your fuel rail. That's fuel inlet from the low pressure pump. And then one of these lines, I think it's the small line right there, is return from the top of the fuel rail coming from the pressure regulator. So that just dumps back into the VST. So I think we're going to leave these hoses connected here. Oh, and we did disconnect, let me point to that one, Jonah. We pointed to that, or we disconnected that hose, and we're pretty certain that's just the air vent breather tube. It tees and then goes up to here.
Also goes into the manifold.
Yeah, and then that also goes to the air manifold for some reason. So, like I said, we're not mechanics, but we can turn a wrench. So we're gonna crack this case off and get inside the VST. All right, so here's what we think. We think we found the problem here. So this is the top of the VST there. We took the bottom bowl off and we set it somewhere safe, hopefully. What I got my hand on here is the high pressure pump, and the housing looks like it's been there for a while. A little bit of corrosion, losing some of its protective coating, but I think our guess is the pump is probably still fine, but since we're in here, we're still gonna replace it. But this here, right where my pinky's at, there's a little grommet, got some ribs on it, and that makes the seal between the pump and the outlet from the VST. And when we pulled that out, we noticed that the top of it was kind of ripped apart. There's the top of it, and I think it's supposed to be some sort of check valve or something to prevent backflow. But either way, the bushing here wasn't far enough up into the discharge of the pump, so it wasn't making a good seal. So I think half of the fuel that the pump was flowing was leaking back right into the VST, causing us to not get enough fuel pressure at the fuel rail down there. So we're gonna get a new bushing, and then we'll pop that back in, put a new fuel pump in there, and hopefully we got fuel pressure. All right, so we got a new fuel pump, but we couldn't get the grommet replaced same day, and we gotta get this boat running the same day. So what we did was we shoved this nut. I think it was a 9/16 nut, stainless steel, that we're using as a spacer to keep that bushing where it needs to stay. Keep it up in the bore there to keep it sealed. So it's not the right way to do it, but it's gonna get us by. So that's kind of what we're doing there. New fuel pump. The connector changes from what they used to do to now. Now they got like a connector here and a connector up in the top of the VST with 2 wires. So yeah, new pump, new wiring setup, and then a little sketchy little bushing spacer there, which should work, and we'll let you know how it goes.